In this video, we're going to look at the top 5 most common questions that are asked in ASDA interviews, and we're going to help you plan fantastic answers that are going to get you a job working at ASDA. Let's start with a question that is basically guaranteed to come up, and it comes up all the time in interviews for grocery jobs. So what shifts can you do? And this question can make or break the interview, and generally people answer it completely wrong. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to be honest. If you physically cannot work at a certain point, then there is no point accepting a job where you can't work the times that you're expected to. On the other hand, success on this question usually depends on showing as much flexibility as you can. You want to come across as committed to ASDA. If you start immediately talking about all of the times that you cannot possibly do, and you're just listing long lists of times that you're never going to work, that is going to be a big problem. So you want to be as flexible as you can. That is what they want. So certain things that they love to hear, and if you specifically mention these times, if you can work them, this is what's going to get them really interested in hiring you. So if you can work in the evenings where, a lot of people would rather be at home, that's a difficult time to staff. That is a great thing to mention. If you can work on weekends, especially on Sundays, that's going to be of great interest to ASDA as well. Some stores, not that many, but some do have very late openings. So night shifts and particularly petrol stations do run 24/7 in some cases. So if you can work night shifts, that is a really great thing to mention. And also stores find it slightly harder to get staffing right at the very, very opening time. So that might be very, very early in the morning, where of course people would rather be in bed than at work. So if you can mention these specific times, the hiring manager, the store manager, whoever is interviewing you, is immediately going to be going, you are just fixing a lot of the problems that I have with staffing. So they're going to look more favorably on you. The top tip for this question is to show ASDA a can-do attitude. So rather than talking about when you cannot do, you're going to try and talk about all the times that you can do. Just answer with can, unless you're absolutely pushed to say, well, that time I generally couldn't do. However, on some occasions, I could be flexible up to this point. So always bring it back to flexibility and you'll be successful in this question. Let's move on to question 2. What do you know about ASDA? And so they may not ask this question directly, but throughout the interview, there'll be lots of opportunities to feed in some knowledge about ASDA. So even if you're not asked this question, you need to study for it, because this is one of the things that's going to make you stand out. So success on knowledge type questions or showing off your knowledge in the interview can be thought of in terms of this diagram here. So a bad answer just has things that everyone knows. So it's just this tiny little circle in the middle. A better answer has certain things that only some people know. And then to be really exceptional, you have to be aware of some things that only very, very few people know about ASDA. And if you drop in some of the only a very few people know, that immediately makes you stand out above everybody else. So an obvious fact that a lot of people are probably quite aware of is things like George is their clothing brand that they offer click and collect. So you're going to research that. What does that mean? How does that fit in with ASDA's business? You can mention that they have ASDA Living, which is a different part of the business. They're owned by Walmart. That is a key fact that you need to know. They considered a merger with Sainsbury's, but that didn't go through. ASDA generally positions itself with a strong value proposition. So they're looking to be fantastic value for money. And they have lines such as Smart Price, which offer extremely good value for money at the lower end of the market. They tend to be large format stores. ASDA doesn't operate in convenience stores. And you can also talk about the fact that they are currently the second largest, but that's a fact that you need to check up on, because Sainsbury's and ASDA have been going back and forward in terms of that. So if you memorize a lot of these facts and do some reading around it, you'll be successful in this question, or you'll be able to drop in these facts throughout your interview and just sound very knowledgeable. So my top tip for this is search on Google for ASDA company facts, and that gives you some fantastic information about the company, and drip in as many of these things all the way through the interview, and it just puts the interviewer in the frame of mind that this is someone who has really studied and really prepared for this interview. And if they're going to work really hard for the interview, they're probably going to work really hard when they come join us. And so they're going to hire you. Moving on to question 3. typical question for all retail jobs: how would you deal with an angry customer in store? So someone's came into the store, they're very angry, they're very unpleasant. What are you going to do about it? And the first thing you're going to say, and the word that you must use in this interview, is de-escalation. If you start with the word de-escalation, you start this question right. De-escalation basically means that you're going to calm everything down, get everything under control, which is exactly the right way to go about it. The second thing you're going to do once you've explained the importance of de-escalation, calming down, and so that's partly you maintaining very calm and being very professional and listening as well. Once you've done that, you're going to talk about sticking to the company's policies. So if someone is aggressive, that doesn't mean that the return policy doesn't apply to them. There's the same policies and the same expectations, regardless of whether someone's angry or upset. You're going to provide the same level of customer service and you're going to follow the same rules. You don't decide on the returns policy, for example. You're going to stick to ASDA's policies. But most importantly, you're going to tell them that you're going to positively represent the brand. So, of course, when someone is angry and animated, it draws attention to the situation. And you want everyone looking on there to be impressed with the professionalism of that member of staff and how calmly and professionally it was dealt with. So you're going to be a great positive vision for the brand, that everyone looking at that is going to think good of ASDA. And the kind of top thing to focus on, and literally say this, is that you never retaliate, you never raise your voice, and you never, shout back. You don't get into an argument. That is the wrong thing to do. And you are being professional and calm at absolutely all times. So if you get all of those ideas in your answer, you will really impress them with your answer to this. Now let's move on to question 4, which is strengths and weaknesses. Standard interview question, which is, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Even if you're not asked this directly, you want to have this prepared anyway. And whenever you get an opportunity, you can start using this prepared answer. So when you're thinking about your strengths, you have to start by picking something that is a genuine strength, because you'll probably be probed on it. And if it's not really a strength that you just made up, you're not going to do very well in that questioning. You'll also have some evidence, because one person might give an answer in the interview which is just they say their strength. Another person says their strength and has evidence to back it up. That person stands out a lot more. And most importantly, you have to have an example that is relevant to your work at ASDA. If you're going to be working on the floor in ASDA, having a master's degree in mathematics is probably not going to be terribly useful in terms of that work. So you're going to focus on things that are totally relevant to your role. So you could say something like, I'm exceptionally reliable and I'm always on time for my shifts, which is a big problem in all grocery stores, is people not being on time, being late. That's a thing managers get fed up of. And if you can say, this is not me, that's a great thing to mention. And some evidence, the first place to look for evidence is if you can get a copy of your reference that's been supplied with your application. So you can say, the manager for my previous job says this. It's not just me that believes this is a strength. I have someone else in a position of authority that's going to back me up on that. And that makes it stand out a lot more. On the weaknesses side, you're going to have to start with an actual weakness. The worst thing people do is they come up with these fake weaknesses that just look dishonest. So they'll say things like, I'm way too much of a perfectionist, which you can sort of see as a kind of weakness, but it's really a form of bragging. So it shows that you don't really have much self-awareness. The next thing you're going to do, once you've come up with something that is an actual weakness, you're going to talk about how it's being addressed. It's much better to be talking about what you're doing about your weakness rather than talking about what your weakness is for too long. And the last thing is, make sure the weakness that you pick is something that is not particularly important for the job. So it's a complete opposite of the previous question. So you're picking something you're not good at that actually doesn't really have anything to do with your work at ASDA. So for example, if you were to say, customers often complain that I'm a little rude. Well, that's not the sort of weakness you want to be mentioning. And if you mention a weakness that is very important to the job, that immediately massively reduces your chances of getting the job. So that's how you answer the weaknesses question. Very simple procedure, starting with an actual weakness. What are you going to do about it? Make sure it's not important. And then the way to actually structure your answer is as follows. So a weakness that I'm aware of is, so just say your weakness, I am fixing this by, and then just talk at length about what you're doing about it. And that's how you're successful in this question. So let's look at the last question before we go on to look at some questions to ask them, which is, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? And the most important thing on this question is to start with something that is credible. So if you start talking about these ridiculous, outlandish plans, you're not going to be taken seriously. You have to also have something that's quite thoughtful. You've actually thought about what you want to do and where you want to go. And you also need to talk about what ASDA has to offer. So what skills are you going to learn by working in the ASDA store that's going to help you to progress, if that's what you're interested in, or help you achieve your 5-year goal. So that might be something like working with great managers and learning by observing and shadowing, and some mentoring is what you're hoping to do. Some things you might want to talk about is some more responsibility. So in 5 years' time, you would like to have a little bit more responsibility. You can talk about the path to going one level higher. So I think one level is reasonable and credible. If you start talking about 5 levels, it starts to become somewhat unrealistic. And then you can talk about being amazing in your current role. Not everyone needs to say in their answer that I want to move up a level. Just being really amazing as an assistant manager, working on the floor as a manager, whatever level you are in the company, just being amazing at that role in 5 years is a perfectly valid answer. The ways people do terribly on this question is they can often talk about things that are ridiculous, or they have no idea what they want to do. Like this question just came out of nowhere. So ridiculous might be going to store manager in 5 years, and that's probably quite insulting to the person that's interviewing you. So if you've got an assistant manager and a deputy manager interviewing you, and you're talking about being their boss in 5 years' time, that's probably not going to go down very well. And lastly, if you start talking about things that, ASDA's just not looking for, so talking about becoming a statistician, well, that's not really likely and plausible for a 5-year career with ASDA. They probably do have people in statistics, but it's not really helpful to the person that is interviewing you for a store-based role. And the absolute worst thing to do is say that you're quitting ASDA. In 5 years' time, I'd like to go work in this completely different industry. That's probably going to lose you the interview. So never talk about leaving ASDA in this interview. That's just a massive no-no. And so finally, hopefully this is very useful to you, which is some questions to ask. So I've given you some suggestions of some really great questions to ask. And a lot of these questions show that you're engaged, that you're really interested in the role, and give you an opportunity to re-emphasize some of your skills. So what would you recommend a new hire do to be highly effective from day one? So you're going to ask that. Then the manager, the people interviewing you, is going to give some suggestions of things you could do. And then you just start saying how you're going to do those things. And it's a really great trick to get them to say, this is what I'm looking for. And then you to reply by going, yeah, I am exactly what you're looking for. And that's a really powerful way of ending the interview with a really positive ending. And finally, make sure you ask something that is directly related to what's come up. So be listening to them and think up a question while they're interviewing you. Finally, thank you very much for watching.